Um, Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the first edition of our Expert Voice webinars, which is set to become a regular feature from meconstructionnews.com, bringing the industry insights, opinions, and thought leadership from some of the best minds in construction. Today, we're joined by Sean McQue, Director of Construction at ALEC. Sean is an experienced and hugely successful construction executive with more than 26 years of experience in the business. Many of them have been spent overseeing operations in Dubai's most high-profile construction projects, including the Dera Waterfront, Dubai International Airport Concourse DNA, and of course, the Mobility Pavilion at Expo 2020 Dubai. He's here today to share some insights about how the local contracting industry is coping with the changing realities generated by the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll be discussing how the way the industry operates has and will continue to change in the coming months and years. And we'll also hear about how ALEC has responded to these challenges, and we'll discuss the lessons that have been learned from this crisis. It should be a fascinating talk. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Sean. Welcome to Expert Voice.
Thanks very much, Gavin. Appreciate you having me.
No worries. Glad you could join us, Sean. So let's start things off with a sort of look back over the last couple of months, where it's been a time of change for everyone. And I wanted to know about how ALEC weathering this crisis, and what do you think contractors should have been doing to prepare for a situation like this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, first off, I just wanted to say, obviously I know this is called Expert Voice, but I think I don't exactly consider myself an expert on the COVID-19 subject. I don't think any of us are experts. It's all caught us a little bit off guard, but yeah, I'm really happy to sort of talk through some of the stuff that we've done to prepare ourselves for it and what we continue to do. And I think the most important thing for us is that we had a very dedicated focus on it, dedicated team, and most importantly, we had executive support from the very top. So right up to CEO level, our efforts around this were heavily supported, and that was really important. So the business saw that, and I think a lot of what we did was we took it seriously up front. I think there was a lot of people were unsure where this thing was going to end up, but the messages were, the writing was clear on the wall from WHO and guys like that saying this thing is going to explode. So we sat down and said we don't know where this thing's headed, but the best thing is to be prepared for the worst case scenario. So we spent a lot of time actually sitting down and saying, what are the worst things that can happen? Sites get shut down, buildings get closed off, our office has to close. What are the things we're going to do in these worst case scenarios? And we sat and mapped those out. And some of those things happened and some of them didn't. But I think while none of those plans were perfect, it just took a little bit of adaptation and we were able to actually be prepared. We had done a lot of the background thinking already, and that really, really helped a lot. And also what we did was we set up a crisis team and we made sure that the right people were on those teams. We selected them very carefully, that people we knew would show empathy towards our employees. I mean, we're a big organization. We've got 13,500 people directly employed. And, it was important to make sure that we were prepared to actually look after those people, whatever happened. So choosing the right team, making sure there were people that were going to act in the interest of the people was really, really important. And then I guess just, we just met regularly. We met every day. We kept on top of the changes. Things have settled down a little bit now, but everyone will probably remember, every day seemed to come with a new regulation, a new rule, a new change. And it was just making sure that we were on top of those changes and adapting our plans as we go. So yeah, that was, and I think another important bit, sorry, Gavin, as well, was just cost. I think as contractors, we're all very cost-conscious people, and we're always worried about what is this going to cost us. And we decided that we couldn't penny pinch. We had to make sure that we did what we had to do to be prepared. And even to the extent we took additional camps. We actually took 2 additional camps that were pretty much empty, just to be prepared for having quarantine facilities available should that event actually arise. So yeah, I think not holding back on the important things was key as well, and that paid off.
Okay. So to me, one of these, while you're talking about this, I think one of the most key things I would say is communication between all levels of the organization. And how much of a challenge was that? Did you find that it was easy to communicate the message, or did you find that there was an element of education that had to be done?
No, it was very difficult up front. I mean, it was the usual story. I mean, in the beginning when it really started to ramp up, I mean, everybody had started using these kind of, things like Zoom and Teams calls and that sort of thing, but none of us were very good at it. We hadn't really had it well set up yet. So it was a lot of phone calls, a lot of confusion, cross-communication. So one of the first things we did was actually set up dedicated WhatsApp groups, one for each project, one for the camps, one for our plant yard, etc., etc. And then we made sure all the right people were on those. And then we had a common platform for communication that was sort of channeled. And then we just got better at communicating, set up regular Teams calls on a daily basis with our key guys out on the projects, etc., department heads, and just communicated daily with them, saying, look, this is what's changed today, this is what's happening, and they in turn were able to cascade that message quite quickly to the rest of the business. So we really did struggle at first, but I mean, you're absolutely right. It was key to making sure everybody felt comfortable, that they knew what was going on, that the company was doing what it could to take care of them. And the better we got at communicating those things, I'd say the more people settled into things and felt a bit more confident about what was going on.
And in terms of these preparations that you've done and the communication, not just within the organization, but also without, talking to your clients and talking to government authorities, because I'm sure you've got projects all over the region, and you've got different rules and regulations anyway. So in a crisis like this, that level of communication must have been amplified as well. How did you manage that situation, dealing with the authorities and dealing with different emirates and all of that?
Yeah, look, I think kind of got two parts to this. I guess the one is just you contractually, each of these jobs, you've got this obligation to deliver a job. All of a sudden, you terribly disrupted, and you start losing time because resources are not there, etc., etc. And I think most of the contracts have sort of things like force majeure or change of legislation, and those are the kind of things I think that contractors will go to explain away the time that's lost, etc. And generally, I think in those kind of agreements, you're entitled to the time, but not the cost. So there's an obvious obligation on everybody to try and make sure that cost is mitigated, because you don't want everybody getting hurt through the process. But I guess it is that, and then just again the communication and just making sure that we are talking to the clients, that they understand where we're coming from. They're not excuses; they're real things. And I think just continuing to communicate that, look for opportunities to mitigate the cost and see what can be done. And I guess as things settle down, the time will come where things will open up a little bit, and then we can start to explore ways of clawing back some of that lost time in a meaningful way. But right now it is still a little bit of a moving target.
Yeah. So talking about that now, I mean, work is obviously still ongoing. We know that construction has been deemed as one of the essential industries in the region, in the UAE especially. I wanted to ask about, how do you, what measures have you been taking to protecting your staff and ensuring that health and safety is maintained and making sure that everyone is looked after? Let's talk about that both on site and in the office as well.
Sure. I mean, that's a difficult thing, and I guess in summary is we sat down at the very beginning, and we actually had a little bit of a statement that we said we're going to live by, and it's people before profits. And we made sure that we pushed that message down right throughout the organization. I mean, it's a tough time, right? And I mean, you've got these guys who are working in construction is considered a vital sector. The rest of the world is effectively hiding away, and these guys are getting up every morning, going to the sites and carrying on with their jobs, and it was tough for them. I mean, they were feeling exposed. So I think making sure that they were supported in the best ways that we could, communicating with them regularly and empowering them with that message that, people come before profit, so that they were, they had it clear in their minds that whatever they were doing on the job to keep them going, they had to first make sure that they were creating the safest possible environment for everybody there, our own people, our subcontractors, the client teams that are also based on the site, etc., etc. So I would say that was kind of the key to it. I mean, we did the same things everybody does. I mean, we had the thermal scanning going on, regular disinfecting. We stopped all the meetings that we could. As a business, we eliminated all of our kind of roaming roles. We didn't want guys moving from one job to another and increasing the risk of cross-contamination. So those are the sorts of people that hung back and tried to use some of the electronic platforms and that sort of thing, the working from home scenario. But yeah, I'd say that was the main thing, just making sure that we put the people first and did what was needed.
And keeping that, talking about that, I mean, was there any provisions made in terms of addressing mental health issues and, because this has been a trying time for everyone, and were there any provisions made to make sure that morale was kept up and people felt engaged and, were looked after from a mental health point of view as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's a difficult thing, isn't it? I mean, I guess in construction, we are kind of a certain type of people, isn't it? And that's one of those softer things we don't pay a lot of attention to. And to be honest, I mean, there was very, very little we knew how to do in the beginning around that. So in short, the answer is no, other than continuing to make sure that we just kept the communication open, made the phone calls to the guys every day, had the Teams calls going, made sure that we were open for them to contact us, express concerns. And I mean, as the thing went on, we found people becoming more and more anxious and more phone calls into HR. So thankfully, we have got quite a robust HR setup, but they were able to, help a lot with that and actually engage with people as much as practically possible, I suppose. But it's a very difficult thing, and I would say I don't think we've quite got our heads around that properly yet.
Yeah. No, well, it's a process for everyone. I think it's a learning process. I think we're all learning how to cope with a situation like this because it's so unprecedented. So, I mean, it sounds like you're at least there is that initiative there as well from your end. But now let's talk a little bit about the wider sort of industry as well. And obviously, as a contractor, you're heavily dependent on your supply chain. How's that been in terms of the situation, managing that supply chain, and the whole situation that's been going on, where, like you said, a lot of businesses have been closed down, they're not operating at full capacity. How have you managed to make sure your supply chain isn't affected when it comes to these projects?
Look, it's been difficult, and I mean, what you need to remember is that these companies are so much smaller than companies like us, and their ability to sort of deal with these things in the way we do is more limited, So we were heavily engaged with the supply chain on each of the jobs. I mean, each of the project leads took responsibility for that. Again, a lot of communication, transparency, honesty, telling them what's going on, giving them access to all of our kind of processes, procedures, protocols, and internal communications, so that they could use those to educate themselves. And then also, I guess to an extent, just kind of pushing them to ensure that they are acting responsibly and doing all the right things by their people to whatever extent we actually do have control of that. In terms of the financials, I mean, that's been a really difficult thing, because I guess the tendency everybody's got, even as in our personal capacities, is to sort of sit on money and wait and see. Nobody wants to part with anything at the moment. And I think it's important everybody understands that, the work's been done, people have incurred these costs, and money is due and it needs to be released, because the impact of that money not flowing downstream is huge. I think everybody's got to take a responsible approach and make sure that all dues are paid, sort of thing. I mean, it's a philosophy we've always held very, very high in our business. I think most subcontractors, it's one of the reasons they enjoy contracting with ALEC, is we're known to be fair payers on time, And in these cases, we've often found ourselves making payments to subcontractors where we haven't necessarily got that money in ourselves yet, just to try and keep things flowing. So yeah, I think that support is important, but again, we do kind of operate on a back-to-back basis in this region, and we are set up that way. So it's important that that kind of flows down from the top. You know what I mean? That cash has got to move.
Exactly. And that, this was an issue already in the industry before this crisis started, where liquidity was a huge issue. And you and I had many conversations about this previously as well. And now, looking at the current scenario, what sort of forecast do you have in terms of what's happening in terms of payments and liquidity in the market?
To be honest, Gavin, I've actually been very pleasantly surprised. I was expecting it to be really bad, but so far, touch wood, I have to give credit to all of our clients. They've come through. Apart from slightly delayed payments here and there, which are not abnormal, the money has been coming through. They have been honouring those payments. So far, so good. I'm hoping that that will continue. Where we are starting to see, the real impact is on new projects rather than behaviour on existing projects. Us as an organisation. So that's definitely tightened up. There's a lot less going around at the moment in terms of tenders, projects that were kind of ready to start being put on ice and not started. I think that's where we're feeling it more than actual, let's say, payment cycles on current projects.
Okay, that's really interesting. And let's talk a little bit about a subject I think that's close to both of our hearts. We've been talking about the technology transformation for ALEC for a long time, and you recently announced a joint venture with CMIC about pivoting ALEC towards a digital future. Let's talk. If you can talk to me a little bit about how important technology has been in this whole crisis and how it's helped you manage the organization and manage operations and ensure communication and all of that as well.
Yeah, sure. The CMIC deal that you're referring to, it's an ERP that we've decided to introduce into the business. That we've actually been doing research and work around that for over a year now. So that was pre-COVID or anything like that. But essentially, CMIC is an ERP, but it's a construction-specific ERP that's developed initially by one of the big contractors in North America. They're a Canadian-based business, and they have a huge market share of all the major contractors in the US and Canada. So we did a lot of research, looked at a lot of options. We've been out to the US and met a lot of the contractors that are using their ERP solution, and we were very, very impressed and felt it was a great fit for ALEC. So yeah, we've signed up to them. Those contracts are all agreed, and we're starting with the ERP implementation now as we speak. Actually, we're just getting going with it. So yeah, we're really excited about that. And that was driven a lot by some of the, let's say, younger, more dynamic employees in the company who understand digitization, where things are going, and we've slowly been convinced as some of the older guys. And the more you look into these things and get involved and understand them, the more you realize that this is the future. So we are really excited about that. And just generally around the digitization, I read something the other day that says this COVID-19 is the biggest digital disruptor we've ever seen. And I kind of get that, because all of a sudden we've all jumped onto these communication platforms and all sorts of things that we sort of held off on for so long. And a lot of the stuff that we've tried to convince employees and consultants to adapt on sites, like paperless inspections and those sorts of things. All of a sudden, people are very keen to learn about those things, and they've been very successfully implemented very, very quickly. So yeah, quite excited about that, because it's kind of forced us all down the road, and we've realized it's not as bad as we think, and actually the change is not as severe as you might expect.
Carry on, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, sorry, I wanted to ask you because, like, as you know, I'm a big advocate of BIM, and BIM 360
Yes.
seems to be the future of the way we do business. And I know that you yourself are a big advocate for it as well. And I wanted, like, this whole working from home, working remotely, it actually seems to have been picked up quite strongly. I've seen a lot of other companies have been picking up using BIM 360 to work on projects remotely and design and engineering and all of that. How has that sort of been for you guys? Have you seen your teams working on their projects using that sort of technology?
Yeah,
and how do you think it's going to change the way you work?
Yeah, okay. I mean, we thankfully, we had actually already started down the BIM 360 journey a few months back with Autodesk. So it's something we had already done a pilot project with. We were really, really happy with it. We started introducing it into all of our jobs now. And obviously, it just made things that much easier when we had to push all of our people out and have them working remotely, because you've got this kind of collaborative platform that they can work together on quite effectively. So yeah, thankfully we had already started down that journey, had some understanding of how it all works. But absolutely, I mean, that's the future. I mean, to the general sentiment, no matter who you talk to, is that everybody is really, really happy with how well they've managed to actually carry on doing what they do with so many people being remote. And everybody talks about this, what's the new normal? It's becoming a bit of a catchphrase now, but it's definitely something businesses need to be thinking about, because us, for sure, we're busy designing what this new organization is going to look like. There's been some relaxation of some of the restrictions at the moment, people being allowed to come back to work. And, everybody's phoning in saying, must we come back? And we're saying, well, no, there's no hurry. What for? We've got a few people that do struggle to be effective remotely, and those guys will start to filter back in. But generally speaking, we don't need to rush back to what we were before. It's never going to be that way again. So as difficult as all these times have been, one of the most exciting things that I'm personally involved in at the moment, which I'm really loving doing, is understanding and designing what this organization might actually look like from now on, with more dynamic roles, people being more mobile and digitally accessible. I mean, construction is always going to be a hands-on industry. I mean, the people that build projects have to be at the place of work, there's no question. But if you think of all of our head office functions, all of our support department functions, definitely there's huge scope for change there. But also those people that do have to be on the job, what's important is how they do their work. That there's so many opportunities to improve on the way that work gets done on site. The amount of time that we waste in big meetings with loads of people that don't generally create much value. People have learned that you can actually have smaller, shorter meetings very, very quickly over a digital communication platform, and you actually, I'm finding, end up with a better result, a better meeting. So I think everybody's learning that, and I'm really interested to see how things carry on into the future.
So from an industry point of view, how do you think the industry is going to change now, in terms of, like, you've talked about ALEC sort of changing, and obviously as a major force in the market, you guys are sort of like the benchmark for a lot of companies, for a lot of the industry. But how do you think the rest of the industry is going to be taking up this, especially the small to medium contractors? Do you think this is actually going to benefit them in a way?
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of talk around innovation, and I think a lot of people think they're innovating, but they're not really. They're kind of biting around the edges. And I think this is going to turn people on to putting a little bit more effort into true innovation. And what does it mean? And for us, innovation, there's no silver bullet. It's everything. It's trying to do everything a little bit better in a better way all the time. It's a culture. If everybody in your business is constantly thinking about how things can actually be done in a better way, and you're always challenging yourself and looking for that continual improvement, then there's going to be massive gains throughout the industry. And I think that's what we're going to see. I think we're going to see more businesses really putting a lot of effort into innovation.
Okay, great. Let's talk a little bit. You touched upon it earlier as well when we've spoken about working with your clients and working with authorities and all of that. But looking at it from a purely business point of view, one of the major issues we were talking about earlier was where we talked about mitigating the impact on contracts, on projects, and all of that. Talk to me a little bit about how you think the industry can sort of address these issues. And obviously, you can't go into specifics with particular clients and all of that, but from a industry-wide point of view, how can contractors sort of mitigate the impact and sort of ensure that liquidity is there, ensure that the payments still come through, and sort of prepare for the new future? Sort of to sum it up, basically.
Sure. Yeah. I think we often talk about the market and the economy, and we know construction is kind of a bit of a barometer for that. But at the end of the day, I mean, the market, it's not a group of people sitting in a room somewhere deciding what's going to happen. I mean, you and me, we are the market, we are the economy, and the confidence in that it comes from the discussions we have with one another. So if we're all talking doom and gloom, then unfortunately, that's the market. Then we're not going to have the confidence. I think we have to understand that economies, they go through these cycles. This is another one of those cycles. Okay, this is terribly more impacted by COVID, but the reality is we will come out of this. Things will recover in the end. So I think we've got to talk the market up. We've got to be positive. We've got to understand that and have faith that things will come out in the end. And people have got to invest. People have got to have confidence in the long term and talk it up. We're not victims. We are the market. We must have faith in our region and we must invest in it.
And do you think that we're going to see a change in the way contracts are structured now in the wake of this, that people are going to be more aware of issues like this and how fragile really some things can be?
Yeah, I mean, how many times have we sat with me about to sign a contract and it's like, natural disasters, pandemics, and you're like, that'll never happen, man, and it has. So yeah, I think people are definitely going to be, let's not write that off, it might happen. And I think it's a good thing because I think there is quite a bad culture in the region of cascading all risk. And putting it where it doesn't necessarily belong. So I think a little bit of pushback off the back of something like this might be good because the risk might be more equally distributed and more shared. So I think that's probably what we'll see. I think we'll see more of those contract clauses that we normally succumb to standing.
Okay, great. We're coming close to the end of our discussion now, but I wanted to ask you really a bit. How do you think we can prepare for this new future where you're talking about being positive and having a more positive outlook? But in terms of the industry itself, can you sort of sum up a sort of your viewpoint in terms of, one, with technology, how we're going to be more innovative, to have contracts that are more sort of understanding, if I can say that, and just sort of generally, how do you think attitudes are going to change within the industry in the wake of this crisis?
Yeah, look, I mean, I've said this before. I think the digitization is going to play a massive role in this, and specifically things like BIM. And I think at the moment, I feel like we've got these kind of old, archaic forms of contract that we use to engage with one another, and projects are set up in this, certain way, where we have a project structured the way it is, And we're taking these new technologies and we're trying to force them into those old structures.
Yeah.
But they don't fit. And I think there's an awareness that we probably need to adapt the contracts so that they suit the technologies. And with that will come a lot of efficiency, because all of a sudden things become quicker, clearer, more collaborative, and not to mention the way in which you can engage with the supply chain very deeply, and all of a sudden it lends itself to once you've done a design in BIM and everything's very well detailed, what's to stop you all of a sudden, that information is able to be used in a factory somewhere very effectively, very quickly. A lot of work happens off-site, and then the site becomes more of let's say, a logistics activity than it does where you bring a whole lot of raw materials and do the work on site. So I think there's going to be a huge change on how the supply chain engages with a project through these digital platforms. And then, of course, the contracts are going to change drastically. The agreements we sign, the form they take, and the way a project is structured, the stakeholders. I think there's going to need to be major change if we're going to leverage these technologies effectively.
Great. Thank you so much, Sean. We'll be taking a few questions from the audience now, if you don't mind staying with us for a little bit longer. So I think we can we get a couple. We'll be getting a couple of questions in, and we will. Yeah. So I think the question now is the time now right to invest more heavily into robotics and modular methodology? If you can see the question.
Yeah, I mean, these are two things. It's the time now to invest. So we quite actively involved in both of these things. Personally, I think robotics is a bit tougher, just the nature of what projects are. I think robotics probably play a much bigger role in off-site work, preparation of things to come to site. I mean, we experimenting with robotics at the moment with things like drilling holes in soffits for services. So we programming those positions into a robot that's got drilling equipment, and then that is able to systematically just go through a basement, for example, and drill thousands of holes. So there's a few limited things with robotics, but I would say probably less so in the short term. Modular for me is a big one. I think that's really where the focus has got to be. It just makes so much sense. And it's building a modular anything off site is the easy part. Figuring out the logistics of how you then move that and get that into place is the difficult bit. But absolutely, I think the time is right, and for me, modular is the right place to focus.
Great. I think we've got a couple more questions coming in. So I think there's a question now: is there going to be a greater dependence on locally supplied materials? And I think that's an important point as well, given the concerns of managing things like sanitation and disinfectation and all of that, and especially in the current climate. Do you think that locally supplied materials are the way to go now for contractors and for projects?
Absolutely. I mean, I wish there was more of it. It takes one of the big problems with bringing all your materials from overseas are the delays that you can't anticipate. So having a deep available supply chain of materials readily available locally would be a great thing for all of us. And not only that, I mean, it's good for the country's economy, right? I mean, if we can encourage more local manufacture and supply, it's going to be more people living there, more jobs. The money stays in the system rather than going out all the time, and it just becomes much more reliable. So it would be a great thing to see more of that.
Okay, great. I think we've got a few more questions before we let you go. So let me just pull up. So in terms of like we were talking about the health and safety things, are there new regulations being rolled out by the government in terms of HSE? And how have you managed to deal with that?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, at the moment, what we've noticed is definitely there's been a change in gear in health and safety, let's say, specifications. And I'm talking about contracted requirements rather than statutory requirements. So I think there's a lot of quite heavy duty, let's say, health and safety specs being implemented on more the recent jobs. I mean, I'd say Expo is probably a really good example. And have they added value? Absolutely. I think it's definitely upped the game. I mean, anyone who's worked in the airport environment will be well aware of this. That's always just been another level. And I mean, that really helped ALEC in terms of how we deal with health and safety and how we manage it internally. But there is a balance to be struck. I think some parts of that could be rationalized. And I think we'll find our way. But as far as I'm aware, none of those have actually been brought into law or regulation.
Okay.
It's more around contracts.
Yeah, great. I think then we'll just take one final question then before we let you go, and So I think the next question is coming in from one of our viewers, and how did you make the case to invest into digital during this trying time? Yeah, that's a very good question considering you're quite passionate about that topic.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll just tell a little bit of story around this. I mean, when we went off to the US, I mean, I was part of a small group of people that went off to go and visit a lot of the businesses in the US and Canada and the UK to talk to them about their ERP implementation process, because that's one of the things we were worried about. We're spending so much money on this. How are we sure we're going to get the return? And we asked that question to each of them, and the answer was exactly the same with every single one of them. They all started out trying to figure out what the ROI was, and within weeks or months, they just dropped it because the advantages and the improvements were so obvious that it didn't need to be measured. They were saying they just it wasn't worth even trying to measure it. It was just so clear to everybody. And I think a lot of us have probably been forced to experience that now during this difficult time. We've all been forced to go a little bit more digital than we were. Probably a move we would never have made if it was our choice. And I think we all very, very pleasantly surprised that it's gone a lot better than we might have anticipated. So I would say it's just so obvious to us. We don't actually worry about that anymore. It's if you're focusing on the right solutions, I think that's the trick. Be very, very selective about what you do, because there's a lot of very isolated point solutions out there that don't connect to other things. And I think if you end up investing in too many small point solutions that you then can't connect, you are going to waste a lot of time and effort. I would say take the time to choose what you choose very carefully and make sure that it's part of more of an ecosystem in the future, because that's where the value will lie, when you start to actually connect some of those efforts.
Great. I think that is a perfect note to end this conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time out to talk to us, Sean, and look forward to speaking to you again, hopefully once this crisis is a little bit blown over. Great.
Yeah,
thanks a lot.
Thanks very much.
And before we go, I'd like to tell our viewers that we actually, as I mentioned at the start of this conversation, this is the first of a series of expert voices that we're doing. And coming up on June 15th, we've got a really interesting discussion with Omnium Resolve about COVID-19 and construction disputes. So I would heavily encourage you all to join us for that discussion. It's going to be with Philip Cronin, and it'll be at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, just like this event, this webinar was. So till then, thank you, and stay safe and maintain social distancing. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Sean.
Cheers.
Thank you.